For those of you who don't know me, my name is Minou. I represent an organization called the Swedish Defense Association, and I will be your moderator today. The seminar will be divided in two sessions. The first session will, as you have noticed, be held in English. And the reason for that is that we have the pleasure to have a very distinguished guest with us here today. Today's keynote speaker, Craig Fugate, was appointed Director of FEMA in May 2009. FEMA is short for Federal Emergency Management Agency and is responsible for the national crisis management in the United States. Between 2009 and 2017, Craig handled over 80 national crises, not to mention Hurricane Sandy. The hurricane will, as you know, hit over 20 states and among other things made New York flooded and powerless. The aim with today's seminar is to listen and learn from each other. We are very pleased to have Craig here with us today, and he will talk about his experience from handling a wide range of crises and how they have shaped the American crisis management system. After Craig's session, we will move over to a panel with Swedish experts, and that will respond to Craig's presentation and talk about Swedish crisis management system's future. With that said, Craig, warmly welcome to Stockholm. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today, and the floor is yours.
Well, good morning. As I do my presentation, I wanted to make it clear these are my observations about things either I have done, participated in, or observed in the States. So it's not a reflection upon anything that MSB or any of the municipalities or other ministries and disasters here in Sweden. This is very much what I have observed. So hopefully, as I present this again, these are the things I've learned. And the first thing is, we call it emergency management mistakes. You call it crisis response, but I think the key thing is, when I try to tell people what I do, most people start out with the process. And I said, what I really do, my job is, when the day-to-day emergency mechanisms of government cannot manage the crisis. Because if the day-to-day coping mechanisms work, you don't need emergency management. And if you think about it, we get very good at responding to the reoccurring risk we face every day. And those tend to be what I call very tightly coupled systems. They are self-reinforcing, they're self-contained. They very rarely have to depend on resources or working with other agencies outside of their system. And they optimize for the greatest efficiencies of resources in response to those, whether it's medical emergencies, police emergencies, fire emergencies. And I used to work for this guy. People always wondered, how did I get to be around the president and didn't wear a suit? Because the president said, I don't want you wearing a suit. I want you to look like you're actually working for a living in Washington, D.C. So why do we do emergency management? Well, generally, our emergency number is 911, yours is 211, but generally from the public's perspective, they call for help in their crisis, and the government can respond effectively. Disasters, by definition, the difference between a disaster and an emergency is the emergency can be managed with your normal authorities, your normal resources. It can be bad. People will die. There will be damages. But the system actually can manage it. A disaster is when that system, that day-to-day organizational structure, the org chart of government, cannot be effective. It cannot manage it. And this is one of the things that I'm not, again, I talk about the U.S., but I've been to enough countries. I see this in a lot of different parts of the world, where as emergency response organizations are so specialized into their roles and responsibilities, they don't always work well across other ministries unless that's a normal course of their daily activities. And so when they do have to do that, it is often somewhat difficult because there's not trust, there's not relationships, and there's not familiarity. And you're asking people on the worst possible day of their career to suddenly trust people that are absolutely total strangers to them, that they are having to be dependent upon to be successful in changing the outcome of the event. My observation is these tightly coupled government systems don't have that kind of built-in flexibility. It's very difficult for them to do that. So I started going across, I'm sure after a crisis, you call them investigations, we would call them after-action reports. If you say investigation to some of the United States, that means the FBI is investigating them. So we'll use your term, you're doing an investigation. I know that on some of them, from the wildfires, train drones, others, there can be 5 to as many as dozens of these investigations. But I'm pretty sure if you went through them, you're going to find some common themes that pretty much stand up every time you do this. And it's what I found is, we do these investigations to learn and then hopefully change what we're doing. In the United States, what we found out is we're identifying the problems. We're not changing them. So we're changing this from lessons learned to lessons observed and then promptly ignored. Because bureaucracies have an inertia. We don't like change. And unless you have a significant forcing mechanism, which generally means you really did something bad, you're going to go back to what you're used to doing. So, in the States, I find, from local to state to federal, one of the primary reasons we weren't prepared for the hurricanes that hit this year is we planned for what we're capable of responding to without fundamentally changing how we do business. It is almost as if bureaucracies always want to get to that steady state of the least expenditure of resources and time to achieve the maximum output. And rather than looking at what can happen, they always create the disaster scenarios that fit their response model. And then they go, well, if it's bigger, we'll scale up. Hurricane Katrina. FEMA did and sponsored an exercise in the state of Louisiana that summer called Hurricane Pam. That exercise was actually a hurricane that was stronger and more intense than Katrina and would have had greater impacts. But in that exercise, every time they exceeded the state and local capability, FEMA had an easy answer: we'll take care of that. And everybody checked the box. Okay, FEMA will handle that. And FEMA, it wasn't malice. It was just they thought, well, the likelihood of it being that bad is pretty remote. And if it is that bad, our systems will scale up. And they didn't. Systems don't scale up. This is my observation. You have to plan for what can happen. And you have to make some decisions about how bad things can be. Because the natural tendency for you is to always go back to your history, your experiences, and go, it won't be that bad. Or your hope is it won't be that bad. And a lot of times, it's just hard to get your mind around how bad things can be. And as much as we hear about in the U.S. about we had 4 landfall hurricanes. You don't hear about the 4th one because that was pretty much a typical hurricane. But 3 of those hurricanes set records. Harvey, over 40 inches of rain fell on Houston. That is the 3rd event that's exceeded the 500-year flood event in the last 10 years. All right? The second storm that hit was Irma. Irma knocked out more power in Florida than any other hurricane before. It went from south to north, all the way up the peninsula. And its intensity in the Caribbean was one of the strongest hurricanes and pressures they've ever recorded. And then you had Hurricane Maria. which struck the VI in Puerto Rico as well as other Caribbean nations. Of course, if you're in the United States, you never hear about anybody else. You're always focused on your stuff. And it destroyed the entire power system on both territories, the Commonwealth and the VI. Not damaged it, destroyed it. And the way I like to explain this is, Harvey was a flood event, and it's a big housing challenge. Irma was pretty much a typical hurricane. Maria was a catastrophic event. But that's what we have to get people to plan for at FEMA. Because disasters, A, don't happen one at a time, and they don't fit what you're capable of doing. It's what can happen. The other thing that I've observed, and this will probably be of more interest to people that are dealing with populations that we sometimes categorize as vulnerable. And I found that's actually an exclusive term instead of being inclusive the minute I start calling somebody special. You're special. You need to go to this special shelter because you don't fit this shelter. And what we found ourselves doing when we wrote our emergency operation plans at the local, state, and federal level. And these are plans for how we respond to the communities we live in. We weren't addressing our populations as they were. We were addressing an idealistic population, and then if you didn't fit that description, we put you into an annex. You know, here's your basic plan, and now we're going to add a bolt-on chapter if you had children. We'll add another bolt-on chapter if you have pets. We'll add another bolt-on chapter if you happen to be frail and elderly. We'll bolt on another chapter if you happen to have a disability. We'll bolt on another chapter if you're not primary English speakers, not your native tongue. I started asking this question and said, what percentage of our population are frail elderly? In parts, I'm from Florida, so I have some counties, there's actually up around 20 to 30%. How many people have pets in the United States? Over half the households. What about kids? Well, that's how we keep getting bigger, so yeah, if you look at households with children 5 and under, 15 to 20% of your population in some places. If you look at disabilities, that could be upwards, both identifiable, visible, but also people that have mental health, other issues. That could be as much as, again, another 20% of the population. Now, add all those up. Who's in your basic plan? Your staff, actually. They wrote a plan that works for them and their families. But when we tell people to evacuate, particularly for something like a hurricane, we had about 6 million people evacuate in Florida. If you got all these people evacuated, half of them, usually more than half of them, had pets. But they're told, well, you can't bring your pets to the shelter. What message did we just tell people? We used to, and some of the things we used to tell people was bizarre. We used to tell people with pets, you need to evacuate or you'll die. However, you cannot take your pets, so leave them plenty of food and water. Now think about this. Either this is the last meal for your pets, or it's not really that bad. But we tend to plan for an idealistic population, and then we try to then force everybody to fit the plan. Instead of taking a step back and going, why are we not writing a plan that's inclusive in the first place? Why do we put barriers up? And in our case, with shelter for things like particularly hurricanes, why do we make people with disabilities go to a special needs shelter instead of just saying, why are general purpose shelters accessible to people with disabilities? Why are not pets welcome? How hard can that be? And people give you all these reasons. I'm like, look, trust me. In the United States, if I go out and I ask people to help take care of pets in a disaster or take care of people in a disaster, who do you think I'll have the most volunteers for? Anybody here ever participated in a disaster exercise? Did you know when the exercise was going to occur? Did you know what the scenario was? Did you have briefings before you did the exercise? Did you practice and rehearse before the exercise? What was the purpose of the exercise? What were you exercising? The fact you can read and follow instructions? Have you ever seen a disaster ever occur when it's scheduled? But think about it. We exercise to success. Part of this is we don't want to alarm the public that we're not competent and can handle everything. I was kind of an odd duck when I got to FEMA, and I told people, we're the federal government, we can't handle everything, get over it. There's this tendency to think that exercises are demonstrations of our competencies. Well, if that's the purpose of it, fine. But then have no illusions that the real purpose of an exercise is not to demonstrate that you can solve all the problems, because if you can, that's an emergency. It's to test your team in adverse situations with challenges that the normal processes won't work, to force them into discussions and team building that would not otherwise occur. An exercise is really designed to be a forcing mechanism to get people to do something that they don't normally do. Because if they're doing what they normally do and it works, it's not that bad. And the exercise itself needs to be based upon what can happen, not what you're capable of managing through your normal mechanisms. So when I was at FEMA, I introduced no-notice exercises. Bureaucracies hate uncertainty and they hate surprises. So they hated me. But my boss said it was a good idea to do it, so I just said, well, the president said I could do it. I had my first exercise. How many of you like early morning riders, like get up around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning? Maybe you've had your first coffee, right? That's when I pulled my first exercise with no notice. I got yelled at by a lot of staff who said, wait a minute, we didn't know there was an exercise today. It wasn't during normal business hours. I was in my car, I was stuck in traffic, I wasn't scheduled to come to work today, I had meetings scheduled, you made me cancel. This was very inconvenient for my job. You work at FEMA. And we, again, find that we have this tendency because we have finite resources. And we oftentimes think very what I call government-centric. If I give you a problem and you're a government ministry, you're going to try to figure out how to manage it with the resources you've got. And so the natural tendency is if it's bigger than that, you think at some point in that disaster, some miraculous resource is just going to show up. Or you're going to suddenly get very efficient at something you've never demonstrated efficiency at in a crisis under the worst possible conditions on your worst day at work. And that's going to work for you. It doesn't. But it's this tendency that people are always locked into. All I have is this amount of resources and capability. If you make the disaster bigger than that, I can't manage it. And I'm like, okay, perhaps you should pursue another vocation. Because I think you're mistaking disasters will always behave, follow your plan, and never exceed the demand signal. That's part of the challenge. The question is, what are you going to do differently? I think this is the hardest thing for people to understand. If you're going to do what you do every day and it works and it's successful, you're going to be very efficient to a point of failure. And if you think your systems that are highly coupled and very efficient now can scale up, you're going to fail in a big disaster in ways that will cause the public to lose confidence in government. And you're always thinking about government because you tend to not think about this problem from the standpoint of what do I need to change the outcome? You're always thinking about what do I need to do? Well, there's a whole lot more stuff than just government when we talk about disasters. But you're never going to get there if you always think your systems will scale up. So this is where, if I'm looking at what can happen, not what I'm capable of managing, if I'm exercising in these problems and I run out of government, I don't get to make the problem get smaller. So what do? What's left? What are the resources I haven't tapped into? It's everything that isn't government. And you kind of, Sweden is kind of, a bunch of your used to be publicly owned and run utilities are now private. So a lot of the things that actually are going to be needed in a disaster are not government anymore. It's the private sector. But where are they at in the plan? Are they part of the team? Are they part of the solution? If you're government-centered, is what I call this, you think about what government's going to do, and maybe ministries will actually work together. That's the first key step. But then you don't have enough. What do you do differently? And so what I try to get people to understand is, look, you have to take a step back and look at all of the community. We ended up calling this whole of community because they got tired of me trying to explain it. But if you just look at government, you can only get to one point. But if I look at the volunteer organizations, if I look at the private sector as part of the team, and if I look at the public, I suddenly have a lot more resources on the table, and I'm actually starting to do something that I learned the hard way. We've always tried to make disasters fit our model, and we always made the assumption that the public was essentially a liability. There was somebody we had to talk to as a parent. There was somebody we had to take care of. We didn't want to give them too much information because we'd panic. And I'm sometimes thinking, I'd love to get them to panic just to see if they're paying attention. But the problem is, in almost any emergency or disaster, who's the fastest response every time? Bystanders and neighbors. Every disaster I ever went to, if you talk about Joplin tornado, which was flat scorched earth, you talk to the people. It said, who dug you out? It was not the lights and sirens. It was a bystander. It was a neighbor. It was family. And we have in the States this tendency to have marginalized the public as part of this response because they're not trained. They don't know the incident command system. They're not certified. We haven't screened them. They're going to do bad things. I'm thinking, if you're worried about that, it's not that bad. But this is when the problem is bigger than government, you have to take off your government blinders and look at the community and go, how do we pull this together? And don't think you're going to control it, but how do you build that relationship before the event? And so this is one that in the States, over a long period of time, we have marginalized the role of the public and created the expectation that no matter how bad it is, somebody else is going to come in and save it. But we also know that if we don't get in the way of the public, they often will do more effective response in the first hours and first days than we can ever do. But then the bureaucracies kick in. There's a phenomenon in the state of Louisiana that during hurricanes and major floods, there are a lot of people that have boats, they're avid sportsmen, and they volunteer spontaneously. This is the key word, volunteer spontaneously, and they're nicknamed the Cajun Navy. And they routinely will go out and take their boats and launch and start rescuing people, and often are the first ones out. Because they live there, they know the areas, they know their neighborhoods, they go. One of the local sheriffs was very concerned they were not following proper safety precautions, they weren't certified, they weren't trained, and they were rescuing people before his deputies could rescue them. I think that was the crux of the problem. So the Louisiana legislature says, we'll fix this. We'll require all the spontaneous volunteers to take a motor safety training course ahead of time. And then we'll only let the spontaneous volunteers that are trained and certified to rescue people. Keyword here is spontaneous. Sometimes I just wonder, I'm like, how many people drowned? Nobody. How many people got hurt? Nobody. These people live on the water. They know what they're doing. It wasn't certified by government, but the government thinks we have to be worried about people's safety. They're saving lives. You're worried about if they got enough life jackets. And then we keep growing the risk. In the States, our insanity is this. We have priced risk so low that even with all these hurricanes, there's a lot of noise right now about stuff we have to do differently. Congress is in the process of reauthorizing our National Flood Insurance Program because we have bumped up flood risk so bad the private sector won't even touch it anymore. They probably would if we get out of the way, but they would charge so much that it would say you couldn't build in certain areas because it doesn't make financial sense. But the federal government will back insurance program to let you build in the areas that the private sector says is stupid to build in. We want to invest money there, but government will back that response. And particularly with climate change, we have a tendency in the states to determine how bad something can be looking forward by looking backwards. We look at 100 years worth of weather events and go, this is about how bad it's going to be, so in the future we need to build to this level so it doesn't get wiped out. Remember I said Houston had 3 events that exceeded 500 years in the last 10 years? If we're looking back at a 100-year risk, we're going to flood every time in Houston. And it's often a dynamic between people who want to build and develop and transfer risk to the public, and the public's, basically government, setting that risk price so low, there's no incentive to change behavior. And so across my great state of Florida, we've actually grown our risk significantly by millions of people into high-risk coastal zones. At the same time, we're seeing sea level rise, and not so much the increased frequency of hurricanes, but the intensity and rainfall events have definitely increased in our measurement. If you look at the last U.S. climate assessment that just came out, irregardless of what the political leadership is saying, the scientists are saying there is no doubt that it's happening, and in most cases, we actually lowballed our numbers last time because we didn't think you'd believe us. Now we're coming back and what's happening, and it's worse than anybody thought. Here's what we know in the United States. Even if we met the climate accords from Paris, it will not stop the devastation that we're seeing in extreme weather events. We are already past the point that we're going to stop this. We have to adapt. And the time to adapt is running out. And after each disaster, when we have our greatest opportunity, is too often we want to build back the way it was, build back in the same areas, and we grow the risk. So, I like to think about survivors, not victims. There's a reason for that. Social media is a big deal to a lot of people. However, government usually gets it wrong. They've treated social media as another form of a press release and don't really understand social media is actually a conversation you're having. It's hard for government. Government is like your parent. They want to tell you what to do with no back talk. How dare you question why we want you to do something? Just do it. And I was like, but I went to this other site and they said that's actually not a smart thing to do. Really, I think what we need to understand is with social media, we need to give people information so they can make an informed choice, because every situation is so specific to a family or individual that it's hard to speak and say everybody do one thing. But with social media, it's a tool. It's not a religion. Tweets do not stop bleeding, last time I checked. Although there's some people think it is the solution to all our problems. But it is a new way to communicate, and one of the few ways we have, we can actually listen to the populations and adjust our messages based upon what we're telling us. But that means government's got to do something we are not good at. Listening to the public as we are presenting information in a crisis of how they're reacting to it, interpreting it, and making decisions based upon that. Again, I like to go back to that point that we need to be community-based. Disasters don't hit political subdivisions, although that's how government's set up. But we tend to sometimes miss. It's like, think of the city of New York. When you think of New York, what do you think of? Like one big city. No, it's not. It's a bunch of boring neighborhoods. It's not a big city. You define yourself in New York by where you live. You don't say I'm a New Yorker. If you live in Staten Island, you don't even think you're part of New York because the mayor never comes over. It's the communities you're in. Communities define themselves. They don't define themselves by political subdivision. Plan, I like mom, plan for the worst, plan for the maximums. Even if it's a low probability, if it's a high consequence event, you need to be thinking about what you're going to do. The frequent impacts you deal with aren't really what drive change. And systems generally only fail in the high consequence, oftentimes low frequency events that we knew about, but we either took the approach of it's infrequent, we don't have the resources, we can't get to it, it's too hard, or we just hope it won't happen. In my experience, hope hasn't been a really good strategy for FEMA. And we must focus on what government does best in the states. And that is the safety, security. There are key things government does that the private sector can't do. It sets the stage for the private sector, but it cannot be done without the private sector. But the key thing is speed. The United States is a large geographical area. Historically, we've always kind of explained disaster responses. Disasters happen, local responders respond, they do assessment, it exceeds their capabilities, they go to the next level, in our case, is the states. It exceeds the capabilities of governors, it comes to FEMA, we do another assessment, we go, yeah, it's bad, now let's do something. I said, well, why don't we just pretend if it's something bad, it's bad, and respond like it's bad? Well, we won't know what they need. I'm like, well, how long will it take us to get that kind of precise information? Days. Why don't we just send the search and rescue teams? Well, we're not sure if they're needed. Well, if they are needed, how long will it take to get them there if we wait for the assessment? Oh, about 72 hours. I said, so how long do you think the survivors trapped in the rubble have? And what it turns out to be is a cost issue. People don't want to spend money they don't have to. I'm like, good, I get it. That's the day-to-day government. Turn your switch. This is a disaster. Time is your most perishable commodity. You're going to spend money that blows your budgets and blows the concept of your daily governmental budgets. But that's what's required. And you're going to do it anyway. And if you wait till you have enough information for certainty, you're too late. And this is where emergency management is also, in these exercises, important to build in a certain degree of acceptable risk. That we're going to take a risk to speed up response without certainty, to get there with enough stuff soon enough. And as I tell people at FEMA, I say, look, this is a binary decision. If we send too much stuff that's not needed, we have to go to Congress and do a hearing. If we don't send enough stuff and we're too late, we're going to have to go to a hearing anyway and we'll get fired. Thank you very much.